This is the Inspired Pilot Podcast, episode 12.
Don't give up. Don't let things get in your way. You can make it happen even if you have to do it part-time, even if you have to squeeze it into a busy schedule, squeeze it around family commitments. You can make it happen.
Welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson. Inspiring stories from inspiring pilots from around the world.
Okay, welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast. This is Marvin Robinson, and I'm very excited to introduce today's featured inspiring pilot, Maria Langer. Welcome to the show, Maria. Are you ready to inspire today?
Of course.
Okay, let's go. Maria Langer is a commercial helicopter pilot and the owner-operator of Flying M-Air LLC, based in Washington State in the United States. Flying is her third career, and she's been at it now for 15 years. Maria blogs about flying, building a new home, recovering from an ugly divorce, and a variety of other things at www.marialanger.com. Okay, I've given our listeners, the Inspired Pilots, just a little overview, Maria. Can you take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself personally, where you're from, and before we jump a little deeper into your journey, can you give us just a brief overview of what you're doing aviation-wise right now?
Okay. Well, I'm originally from the East Coast of the United States. I was born and raised in New Jersey and then lived in New York City, and then back in New Jersey for a while before I moved to Arizona. And most recently, about 2 years ago, I moved up to Washington State. So I've been around the country a little bit. There's no aviation in my family. Nobody wanted to fly. Nobody flew. My parents, in fact, my mother is afraid to fly, just detests doing it. My father would rather hop in his car and make a 1,000-mile drive from New York to Florida than to do a plane ride to do that. So I'm really no aviation in my family at all. I started out as my first career was as an auditor I have an accounting degree. I was an auditor and a financial analyst back on the East Coast. My second career started around 1990. I started writing about using computers, and I still do that a little bit, but mostly I'm finished with that now. I did pretty well for myself, and I always wanted to learn how to fly helicopters. So I started to learn to fly, and I kind of got addicted to it. And I bought my first helicopter, a little Robinson R22, the two-seater, and tried to start a business with it. Didn't get too far with that. Flew for a season at the Grand Canyon. They were flying long rangers, and then bought an R44 and expanded my business. And what I'm doing now mostly, I do agricultural work mostly in Washington State and California. In fact, my helicopter's in California right now on a frost contract, but I also do cherry drying work here. I have a Part 135 certificate that lets me do charter flights. So I take people on wine tasting tours in this area. This is wine country in Washington. And I also do some survey flights and photography flights. And basically I do everything with the helicopter except lift and spray. And that's basically where I am right now.
Wow, there's definitely a lot of good stuff there. Today, Maria, you are our featured inspiring pilot, and on the Inspired Pilot Podcast, we do delve into the journey, so we are going to touch on a lot of those points you mentioned there. But every journey does have to start somewhere. So you've given us a little bit of background. You've said that you are the only aviator in your family. There hasn't been really many role models from your family anyway. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us the story, Maria, of how you first got involved with flying and wanting to be a pilot?
I can tell you about my first flight ever. It was a helicopter flight, in fact. I was probably about 7 years old. I was on vacation with my family in Maine, which is the northeastern corner of the U.S. We did a lot of camping vacations back in those days. And we were driving along the road, and on the side of the road was a helicopter, which I think might have been a Bell 47. And there was a sign out there, and it kind of gives you an idea of how long this was. The sign said, "Rides, $5. And my father turned to us and he said, who wants to go for a ride? And he and I were the only brave souls to do that. My sister and my mother didn't want any part of that. So he and I went for that helicopter ride. And I tell you, it really stuck with me my whole life. I always thought it was a great great opportunity that I was able to do that. And I decided back then that if I ever learned to fly, I would learn to fly helicopters. And it became an item on my list of things I always wanted to learn. And that list just kind of, stuck out there. And it's very expensive to learn to fly helicopters. So it didn't really seem like anything I would ever be able to do. But then as time went on, I was able to afford to learn to fly, and I learned to fly helicopters.
So when you first decided, okay, it was on my to-do list and it was probably parked in that bottom drawer of that to-do list sort of cabinet.
Yeah.
When you were able to afford to fly, what was that key driver? Was it just, I just want to tick that box and just get my PPL? Did you have any aspirations to go professional at that stage?
No, I didn't at all. In fact, I wanted to learn because it looked like a fun thing to do, and it is fun, I'll tell you that. It looked like a lot of fun. It looked like a really neat skill to have. Just as an idea of another thing that was on that list that I achieved before, it was I wanted to learn how to ride motorcycles. And I did that about 10 years before that, in my late 20s, and really enjoyed that. And really, I still ride a motorcycle to this day. So it was the kind of thing where I just thought, well, this would be really cool to learn, to know how to do. And what wound up happening is I really, really liked it. And of course, I didn't have a helicopter in those days. And it was when I got my license, it took me about 1.5 years to get it because I did it part-time and I took off during the summer. And, I was learning in Arizona where it's very, very hot in the summer. So I really took my time about it. But by the time I got my private certificate, I wanted to fly more and I didn't want to drive 90 miles each way to rent a helicopter. And I had the money, so I bought a small used helicopter. And that only made me want to do it more. So it got to the point where I wanted to do it more and I wasn't rich. I mean, I made a good living at my writing work, but it wasn't that I was rich. So I realized that if I really want to do this, I need to do it commercially so that it could pay for itself. And that's what turned the private pilot desires into commercial pilot desires, was just practicality. Not having enough money to do it as much as I wanted to do.
Fantastic. And just you mentioned that to actually obtain your PPL, you took a couple of years to do that. That's the same thing that happened with me. I literally dragged it out over 2 years. And, some people, you can actually turn up at school, throw a load of money down and get your license, shiny new license in 3 months or whatever, even in weeks. But I actually found, someone said to me, well, why did it take you 2 years? And I was like, well, you know what? I actually learned a lot in those 2 years. I sort of grew, matured anyway, but I sort of grew and I obviously was exposed to a lot of people. And that 2 years was probably, I felt as a really good grounding. Did you find that helped as well?
I think that it did to a certain extent. I think that there's pros and cons to doing that, in my case anyway, was that I know that it took me more hours, flight hours to learn to get my certificate, because being that I was away from it for long periods of time and then went back to it, I had to basically reclimb the learning curve on certain things. And so it definitely cost more in the long run to do it that way. But the benefit, and again, this is a benefit cost-wise, was that when I was done, it was paid for. I didn't have any debt. And there's a lot of helicopter pilots, especially around here, who will get into a program and they'll learn how to fly. They'll get all their certificates in maybe a year. And when they're done with that year, they're looking at $80,000 in debt. And I was really fortunate in that I wasn't in that situation. When I was done, I mean, the whole thing was paid for already. And there were no loans to pay off or anything like that. And that was really good.
Yeah, it's like, okay, there's a big challenge, a big mountain to climb just to obtain your license, but then you just fall off the other side of the mountain and another mountain of debt to climb. So a lot of pilots are, especially obviously commercial pilots, are in that situation. Talking about challenges, so flying definitely has its own challenges, and we've spoken about some of them already. Can you take us back to during your initial training when you were training for your PPL? What did you find challenging and how did you overcome this? I'm thinking about, someone who's maybe on the fence right now. What did you find challenging?
Okay, well, the hardest thing about learning to fly helicopters by far is learning to hover. And it's the very first thing you have to learn. And a lot of people think it's easy. You just, hold the stick in a neutral position and you're going to hover. And that's not it at all. Every single time you make one control adjustment with one of the 4 controls, it affects the helicopter, and you have to make one or more controls with the adjustments with the other ones. And in the very beginning, you over control. There's no two ways about it. You over control, and it takes about 5 to 10 hours of flight time of practice to be able to hover. And a lot of people who learn to fly helicopters, they'll get started and they'll get so frustrated because they think that they should be able to do it right away and they can't, that they give up and they say, I'll never be able to do this, and they give up. The reality is that you struggle, and then one day, all of a sudden you can do it. And then like over the next 2 hours, you get good at it. Not great at it necessarily, but good at it. So that's the first hurdle, is just learning how to hover. Another thing I had a little bit of trouble with in the beginning, and this was while I was learning to hover, was, believe it or not, motion sickness. I was getting, you're in a helicopter, you're 4 or 5 feet off the ground, learning to hover. It's moving back and forth. You get this pendular motion. Your, yaws changing. You're just, pointing in different directions. And it's very easy to get to feel sick. And my flight instructor gave me some information about how to resolve that, and the usual look out at the horizon. And obviously, you can't really take drugs, Dramamine or anything like that. But it was something that I got over. If anyone does have problems with motion sickness, there's a device here that they sell in the U.S. I assume they've got something like it over there too. It's called C-bands. It's basically an elasticized wristband with a pressure point, and you put them on both wrists. And it really works to take care of motion sickness, whether it's air sickness, seasickness. And just as a side note, any women that are pregnant that get morning sickness, it helps with that too. It helps with migraines and all that. So that's just a little side note there, if you want a drug-free way to get rid of motion sickness. I guess some of the challenges that I had later on was when my flight instructor left to start his job, and I wasn't quite done yet, and they put me on with another flight instructor. That flight instructor was a very different type of person. A lot of times when we were flying together, I didn't know if he was flying or I was, because he was so on the controls. And there was a lot of frustration in that.
How did you overcome that?
The way I overcame it is I left the flight school. I went on to another flight school.
It was really that bad, yeah?
It was that bad.
Yeah.
It had gotten to the point where my flight instructor who left said I was ready for my commercial check ride. And the new flight instructor claimed that I could barely hover. So there's a definite disconnect there. I tried talking to the school manager, the school owner about it, and he sided with the flight instructor. I suspect that they were trying to keep me in the program as long as possible because they saw me as somebody with deep pockets.
Yeah.
So I left the flight school. I went to a flight school in the Los Angeles area. I gave myself 10 days, and in 10 days of working with their flight instructors, I was able to finish up my training and get a check ride and have my certificate. So, one guy's telling me I could barely hover, but yet 10 days in another flight school, got my commercial ticket. I think there's definitely a problem there. It's the thing that I want to encourage students to do, especially maybe not in the beginning because you really don't have a handle on it. But if you feel that your flight instructor is not doing the right thing for you, if you can't ask for another flight instructor or deal with it some other way like that, I do encourage you to do what's right for you. Flight training costs a lot of money, especially with helicopters, and it would be a shame to waste money or waste time being stuck with a flight instructor who really didn't have your best interests at heart. So it's the kind of thing where you just have to take control and do what's right for you.
Yes, especially with the commercial training, we found out on some of the previous episodes that there are a lot of options in terms of payment. And obviously, if you're paying as you go, then obviously you definitely have that option to sort of jump ship as and when. Some people obviously paid up front for massive discount. Obviously, they might have a different kind of conversation going on, but definitely some great advice there. Thank you for that. You've mentioned a couple of aircraft so far. So you've mentioned the R22 and the R44, and I think you mentioned the Long Ranger as well. Mm-hmm. Can we go into aircraft types? So how many different aircraft types have you flown so far? And, what aircraft do you hold the closest to your heart and why?
Those three are basically the ones that I have the most experience in. I have about 1,000 hours in the R22, and at this point I've got about 1,800 in the R44, and then I've got about 400 in the Long Ranger from working at the Grand Canyon. The R44 is a great helicopter. It's gives you the most bang for the buck. It's a smooth ride. It flies just like a Long Ranger, believe it or not. It's got decent performance, and it really does the job. I have a Raven 2, not a Raven 1. It's got better performance. The reason I bought the Raven 2 is I do a lot of high-density altitude flying, at least especially when I was in Arizona. And I really needed that extra power. And I highly recommend to anybody, if you've got the choice, go with the Raven 2, because you can never have too much power in a helicopter. The Long Rangers that I flew at the Grand Canyon, I flew for Papillon. The helicopters were old. They were very well maintained, but they were also very kind of industrial inside. They weren't, my helicopters got, for example, leather seats and Bose headsets and stereo and all this other neat stuff. And the Long Rangers were, pretty stripped down industrial machines. Some of them were used in the off season for utility works, just to give you an idea. They flew well. I mean, I have no real opinion of them. I can't say I love them or hate them. Everything that I've flown is pretty good, but once you get out of an R22 and into something else, you never want to go back to an R22 again. And I could tell you, because I had my ship for, I don't know, about 5 years, and I decided, let's see what it's like to fly an R22 again. And I went back to flight school and I paid for an hour of flight time. And I was like, I can't believe I flew this thing for 4 years.
Why? When you said I couldn't believe it, go on, spill the beans.
It's, the R44's got hydraulics, so the controls are really, really smooth. And the R22 doesn't. And there's a lot of... there's like a trim control that you have to deal with, and it has problems with carburetor ice. You have to watch your carburetor ice to make sure that whether or not you have to use carburetor heat. And there's just more of a pilot workload, and it just handles, it's really squirrely. If you could fly an R22, you could fly anything. I mean, they're really, really squirrely little helicopters. But the R44 is just so much more, it's like the difference between driving, like a 1979 Ford Pinto versus, I don't know, a Mercedes or something like that,
I think that paints a great picture there.
Yeah, that's what it's like. So.
Awesome. Okay, so the Raven 2 is great, and I think is that the fuel inject? It's fuel injected, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
it is.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent.
I have a tiny bit of time in a 𝗏𝗏, which is a kit helicopter. Use 500. Oh, let's see what else. Bell 47. And all of those little, belonging to friends. Here, you want to try it for a while, that kind of a thing. But nothing not like these other ones. I really have most of my experience in the ones I listed.
Excellent. Just going to a journey now. From gaining your commercial ticket, then what happened next, and where did you go to? I think you mentioned a few hops, but can you just take us through there and tell us some stories?
Well, in the helicopter world, and it's probably pretty similar in the airplane world, in order to get a job flying helicopters commercially, they want you to have about 1,000 hours. Most people will get that time by becoming flight instructors. But I didn't go that way because I had my own helicopter, first of all. And second, I had other work to do that paid very well. My writing work paid very well. And I didn't want to give that up to become a flight instructor. And anybody who's a flight instructor could tell you financially why. So I had to build my time by myself. So I just basically flew as much as I could. I would take it. I would just take it to visit friends. I had friends that had homes where I could land it, in their backyards, or friends that lived on airports. I would take it, out to lunch, up to Sedona or, the Grand Canyon. I would take it on long cross-country flights. I took it up to Colorado once. It was probably, I don't know how many miles that is. I did it over a number of days. It's probably, 1,500 miles maybe. Oh, probably not that much. Maybe 1,000 miles.
That's a big deal in a helicopter, isn't it? It's a big deal anyway, but in an R22.
In an R22, it's really a big deal. Yeah. And then I took it around the Grand Canyon's airspace once. I went up to Placerville, California. That's probably another 700 miles, something like that. So I would do these really long flights. I had a commercial ticket already, so I was able to do flights for hire, but I could not do, I was limited to certain types of flights. I could do rides back then. I could do photo flights, survey flights, but it was limited, 2 seats and the weight restrictions. And at the time I was not, I was a big girl, we'll just say that. And, that takes away from the amount of payload for passengers and fuel. So I built up my time that way. A friend of mine was working as a utility pilot at the Grand Canyon for Papillon, and he encouraged me to apply, and he kind of brought my application to their attention so that I got an interview. And I got the interview. They liked me a lot, and I worked for them in the summer of 2004.
Did you have your 1,000 hours by then?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And flew for them and got a lot of experience, about close to 400 hours in the Long Ranger, and learned a lot about flying in high winds, high density altitude, the differences between turbine and piston. It was a really, really good learning opportunity. And although I liked flying over the Grand Canyon. It's a beautiful place. It's just gorgeous. I didn't like working for a company. You got to understand that at this time, I was in my 40s, so I was a good deal older than most of the other pilots. And I had some business experience from my original jobs and then from my other work that I did. And there were a lot of things that the company was doing that I thought they could do better. And I found it very frustrating that nobody seemed to care. Yeah. So that kind of played around in the background, in the back of my mind. And then near the end of the season, the other pilots started getting childish. Everybody was antsy, ready to move on to their next jobs. And, we were under contract to stay. And things got a little, unprofessional is what I want to say. And because of that, I didn't really enjoy the work atmosphere there. I did learn a ton, and I highly recommend it to anybody who's flying helicopters to work at the Grand Canyon, because any kind of fears you've got about flying, you'll either leave right away, which somebody in my class did, or you will get over those fears. The high winds, flying in 50-mile-an-hour winds was not unusual in the spring. Flying in really low visibility because of fires or weather, whatever, dodging around thunderstorms, lightning striking, quarter mile away from where you're flying. These are all things that were part of the job.
Is flying, is this kind of type of flying in this area of the country, is this like where a lot of new pilots go to sort of spread their wings, as it were?
Yes, it's the first, it's considered an entry-level pilot job after being a flight instructor. Normally, guys you'll have about 300 hours when you get all your certificates. You'll work up as a flight instructor for 300 to 1,000 hours, usually. And then at that 1,000-hour marks, you'll try to get a job flying turbine helicopters. And it's usually going to be either the Grand Canyon, Alaska, or sometimes at the Gulf, doing flights out at the Gulf. Yeah. Gulf of Mexico, the oil rigs.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 main places, entry-level jobs that the pilots go to. That's not saying that's all of them, but that's the main ones.
The main ones, excellent.
Yeah.
So what happened there? So you decided to cut the cord and you left there?
Yeah, it was the end of the season, and they announced that our contracts were fulfilled. We were, good to go if we wanted to. And I stuck around. A lot of us stuck around for a little while. I stuck around for about another month. And then I decided, I was working on books, and my editors were freaking out because I wasn't getting stuff done on time. And I decided it was time to move on. So I left there. In the meantime, that summer, I'd placed an order for my R44 and sold my R22 in October of that year, and took delivery of the R44 in January of 2005.
What was that like, Maria?
That was amazing.
Come on, jump in there. Apologies, but tell us that experience of, you've made that order a little while ago, obviously put down a deposit, and then that day when you're at, what happened? Were you at the factory?
Yeah, I went to the factory to get it. In order to pick up a Robinson helicopter and bring it home, you have to have flown the route That's a rule that they've got for ferry pilots. There's a whole bunch of rules involved, but that's one of the rules. And I had actually taken the Robinson safety course a few times, and I had flown there in my R22. So I knew the route. It's in LA, and the airspace is pretty intense around there. There's a lot of controlled airports. And so I arrived. I wanted to get it back. They had kept delaying the delivery, and I had set up an event for me to fly at, which was going to be, I think it was going to be on a Saturday, and this was on a Thursday that I went to get it. And there was a lot of weather coming in, and it was really vital to get it before this weather moved in. So I flew out to LAX, and my the guy that I would later marry and divorce, he was with me. I call him my husband, so I'll refer to him as my husband. So my husband was with me. And what they do when you're picking up a helicopter for purchase at Robinson is they will send a helicopter to LAX to pick you up and take you to Torrance. So you go to the top, the helipads up there, and they come pick you up, and then they take you low, like 100 feet over the Pacific Ocean, and you're under all the departing traffic at LAX, and then you get to Torrance, and they do an auto rotation down to the field. It's just the way they do an approach because it's quietest. And they dropped me off, and then we sat in the lobby for a while because the paperwork was delayed, the loan papers and all that. And I'm looking at my watch, and I know it's going to get dark. It's January, so it's going to get dark pretty early, and I want to try to get home. It's about a 4 or 5 hour flight. And finally they come get us, and they bring us to the helicopter. They've already dragged it out onto the ramp. They hand us all the paperwork and the keys, and they basically just go back inside and close the door. And that's it. And they just leave us out there on the ramp with this brand new helicopter. It's got 5 hours on it. And we just we were in a hurry, so we just did a quick pre-flight and climbed on board and got the heck out of there. We got as far as we got as far as Palm Springs area, about halfway home.
Yeah.
When it just got too dark to fly through the desert in the dark, and we stopped for the night. And then the next morning, we got up before dawn and got out to where the helicopter was parked at the airport, and took off in the dark, and the rainstorm was right behind us. And it's kind of a shame because that first flight I had to fly in the rain, and it took a little bit of paint off the rotor blades right off.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know, but it happens. Yeah. And I got home, and all my friends at the airport came over to look at it. It's kind of like buying a new car, but more interesting to pilots. It was, gave some rides to friends and then put it away. And sure enough, the next day, I did a rides event at a place out in the desert, and it turned out to be a really good event. But believe it or not, with 11 hours on the aircraft, I had my first bird strike. Jeez. And dented one of the leg fairings, which was kind of a shame, but it happens. Yeah, it's christened by a bird.
Exactly. So you've got your R44 now. And what did you do from there on? I'm assuming this was part of a planned approach. I guess it's the birth of your commercial interests.
What I had done is back in October, I had started the process with the FAA to get what's called here a Part 135 certificate. And that's a certificate that lets my company fly charter flights for hire, on-demand charter flights. In the U.S., you can't do those kind of flights there's certain restrictions. You can't do them unless you have this piece of paper, and additional FAA oversight. Means like I get a check ride every year. I have to be on a drug testing program. They can come inspect my hangar anytime, all those different things. And the process normally it takes anywhere from 4 months to some people, go at it for years and never get it. But I managed to get it in 4 months, and I had that by February. So I had the helicopter about a month when I got that certificate. And then that enabled me to do charter flights. And I started offering flights, day trips to Sedona, the Grand Canyon. Let's see, where else did I go? I mean, longer trips than that. Trip tours around Phoenix, because I lived near the Phoenix area. And I had some brochures and really pushed for that. And I have to admit, it didn't work out very well. And I think most of the reason for that was that I had a lot of competition in the area with a lot of flight schools. And there just wasn't enough interest among tourists to spend that kind of money on a day trip.
Yeah.
And that's the problem is that I could cut my prices. I could do shorter flights. And the problem is I'd be spending, half a day prepping the helicopter, doing a flight, putting the helicopter away. If you do that for a 20-minute flight, you're never going to make any money. You're going to be just wasting all your time. And I learned that straight out in the beginning. And at the time, I was still in financial situation pretty good from my writing work. It was still bringing in good money at the time. So it wasn't really important for me to make a lot of money. It was just important for me to make enough money to start defraying some of the expenses of ownership.
Yeah.
I had a loan on it. Of course, I had my insurance payments were very expensive. There's some, obviously ownership costs and annual every year, things like that. So I went on like that. Let's see, that was started about 2005. And then in around 2007, I started getting some good regular customers. I had a group of photographers. There was a photographer based in Chicago who was Russian, believe it or not. And he would do photo tours for Russians in the U.S. And he hired me to fly his people over Lake Powell a few times. And that became a regular thing. We did that usually about once a year. And that was one time we did Lake Powell and then Monument Valley and then out to Shiprock, which is all places in the desert Southwest in Indian country, beautiful terrain. And, that job was 25 hours of flight time. And when you get a job like that, you start to bring in real money. So I had that, and that was a turning point. And then I also started doing aerial survey work for raptors, birds of prey.
Yeah.
That was part of an environmental impact study for wind machines, windmills. They started putting in a lot of wind projects in the southwest of the U.S. and Washington State, even where I am, they have a lot of them. And they would be required by the government to do these environmental impact studies to see how many birds of prey were in the area that they could potentially affect. And that kind of work, lots and lots of hours, very tedious flying. We would fly along the faces of cliffs, about maybe 50 feet off the cliff faces, depending on how high we were. We could be high or low, flying maybe 20, 30 miles an hour. And then if we saw a bird nest or a bird perching or signs of a bird like, bird guano or something on the cliffs, they would mark the GPS coordinates and take pictures. And sometimes we'd have to go around and see it again. Really tedious work, but a lot of it, maybe sometimes 30 hours in a week, which is really, really good.
That's very good. Yeah.
And that's when my company started being profitable, was when that happened. And then after that, I started doing the cherry drying work up in Washington State in the summertime. I'd come up for anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks at a time, June, July, August.
So like a season, yeah?
Yeah, it's definitely a season. It's a short season. I was lucky. I'm lucky now. I still do it. And I'm lucky now I get about 11 weeks every year, which is a long season. Most people are lucky to get 3 or 4 weeks. But I've been working my contracts. In fact, I was just getting my contract set for this year. I was starting to talk to my growers about it. And that work is kind of weird. Cherry trees, for cherries, the 3 weeks before they harvest the cherries, if the cherries get wet, they can absorb the water through their skin, and that will cause them to expand, and the skins will split. And once the cherries split, they can't sell them. And if they get more than 50% split in an orchard, they won't even bother picking the orchard. So they're really motivated to keep the cherries dry. And the only way to keep them dry is to dry them off after it rains. So they hire helicopters and pilots to stand by, and we basically just hang around. And then when it rains, they call up on the phone and they're all frantic and they say, "You got to come over now and you got to blow my cherries." And
really big hairdryer. Is that what you're talking about?
They're really, they're panicked. They're like freaking out. And if you say, "I got one before you," they're like, "Well, do it as quick as you can." And so you go over there and you fly over the trees, slow about 5 to 10 feet over the treetops and slow about 5 to 10 miles an hour. And you just go up and down the rows of trees. It's very tedious. It's potentially dangerous if there's obstacles like wires, buildings, taller trees, things like that. It's only done during daylight hours, so you don't have to worry about doing it at night.
Yeah.
And it's And every year there's a crash every year. And a couple of times there's been some fatalities. There was one 2 years ago. There was another one 3 years ago. A lot of people think it's a great job for low time pilots, but it's really not. You're flying in sometimes pretty intense conditions. It might be windy. It might be still raining, where you can't see out the windscreen because you don't have enough forward momentum to keep the water off the bubble. It's not an easy job, and it has the potential to be pretty dangerous. You're flying in what they call the dead man's curve.
Yeah.
If you lose your engine, you're going to crash. There's no way you can auto rotate from that altitude, and you're going to go right into the trees, and then things start flinging around. And what usually gets him, there was another one last year, I forgot about that. He got it with the rotor blade. It came through the cabin and hit him at the back of the neck.
Jesus.
And killed him instantly. This will be my 8th season, 8 years now this will be. And that, along with the survey work, my company started being able to put money away for the overhaul that I need, and things like that. It's been very, very good to me. And that's basically what I'm doing now. The other thing I do is I started doing frost 2 years ago. This is my 3rd season, and that's in March and April. It's in California, Central Valley. The Central Valley of California produces 80% of the world's almonds, the nuts.
Yeah.
And
80% of the world's almonds.
Yes,
Wow.
80% of the world's almonds.
Okay.
Come out of Central Valley of California. So where they're talking about drought now in California, that's directly impacting the almond growth, because if they lose those trees due to not being able to water them, that's the end of almonds. Anyway, so the problem with that is that the trees bloom in late January, they bloom in February. Then as the nuts are beginning to form, they are they're like gelatinous. They're like gelled. That's what they're like as they're forming. And if a frost comes and it drops to, right around freezing, that will destroy the developing nut. And again, it's the same thing. Once the nut is destroyed, that's it for the season. So they hire helicopters to stand by. They work it a little bit differently. I don't actually have to be down there with the helicopter. They usually know in advance if they might need me. Whereas the rain, obviously, they don't need you until it actually rains. So the helicopter's down there on the contract, and they've called me out so far twice. Well, 4 times total, 4 days, I should say. And I'll fly down there. I'll take an airliner down there and, prep the helicopter to fly. And then I'll just wait around until they call me out. And this is my 3rd season, and I have yet to actually fly over the almond trees.
So it's a case of literally they want you to do a similar thing to what you were doing with the cherries, and literally just blow down, use a downdraft and keep the moisture off, I guess.
It's not the moisture. It's what it is that it's colder down below because there's a thermal inversion. So what they want you to do is that you get over the trees and then you slowly rise until your outside air temperature gauge shows that it's above freezing.
Yeah.
So now your rotor blades are up in the warmer air. And as you're flying over the trees, you're pulling that air down into the trees.
Wow.
So you do that. It's usually about 30 feet over the trees. And it's usually, like 25 miles an hour, maybe. So you're flying faster, you're flying higher. You're not flying, you could cover more in a shorter time. But the drawback is that it's usually done at night. So it's in the middle of farm country, so it's pitch black dark.
No references.
And it's all kinds of wires. There's wires all over the place. So it's a obstacle-rich environment. And it's amazing to me that so few people get hurt doing it. But I think it's because there's so little flying to be actually done.
What I'm amazed by is how ingenious these ideas are. And,
Yeah.
I'm sure the helicopter was not invented to do this, but, the farmers have, come up, I don't know who invented this idea, but the helicopters are being used for an amazing sort of task. It's kind of crazy. And it's interesting as well. I'm just going through, as you're talking, I'm just making notes, and it's like the scenic flights, wine tasting, cherries, almonds, charter flights. These machines can be used for almost anything, and it's just up to your imagination what you can't use it for. So yeah, it's crazy. These helicopters are amazing.
It's great. And what's funny is that when people think, so many people that are learning to fly helicopters, and they want to do a route like my route, which is they don't want to be flight instructors. They just want to get a helicopter and they want to put out a shingle and do rides. And the problem is that I don't want to discourage anybody, but I just want to insert a dose of reality. And the reality is that unless your helicopter is in a place that's going to attract a lot of deep-pocketed tourists, you're not going to be able to make a go of it with just doing rides or tours. You need to have some other way to bring it in. And what I've discovered is that agriculture, doing agricultural work is, for me, is working really well. The other thing that pays well for helicopters is utility work, long line work and moving things and doing fire suppression, things like that. And they use helicopters for that a lot here too. But I'm not set up for it, and I don't think I need to learn that. I think I'll let the other guys do it.
I think you said as well, you mentioned flying helicopters is expensive. And you mentioned there, unless you have a long line of deep-pocketed tourists, then you're not going to, you're going to struggle. But where there is a real return on investment is, the utilities, like the mining, where there's the helicopter cost is nothing compared to what they may find on the lines or the pipelines or all these cherry crops, a whole year of cherry crops or the almond. So that's where the real return on investment comes, and the cost of the helicopter is negligible even.
It's what the goal is. What I've discovered the goal is to find regular repeat clients who understand the value of the service that you're providing and are willing to pay for it. And if you can find enough clients like that, that's it. That's your business model. I don't go to an office every day, at the airport or whatever, and sit around and wait for somebody to drive up and say they want a helicopter ride. I don't even want to think about doing that. But yet there are other people who think that's the way they have to go, that is the only way to go. And what I'm trying to impress upon people is that you might get disappointed if you try to build a business model on that, unless, again, if you're in the great place for that.
I'm assuming as well, Maria, this is something you've eloquently described the situation which is really real right now and what you've experienced. But this is, I'm assuming you've learned this as you've gone along.
Oh yeah.
This is something which you've gone, when you were flying at R22 and you were wondering why you couldn't fit anyone else in there, you weren't thinking this now. But I like the way you've definitely been on the journey, and what you just described there is perfect. Excellent. Definitely a takeaway there.
Yeah, no, it's something that you learn, and a lot of times, and I'm not saying that another way won't work. It could, but I guess I'm trying to encourage people to be open-minded and to try to crunch the numbers and look at things realistically. There was a guy that flew with me. A lot of times I would do flights with low-time pilots who wanted to build time in my helicopter, when I had to move the helicopter from, across long distances. And I had one guy who flew with me, and he was going to lease an R44. He lived in Wyoming, which is in the northern U.S., in a very remote kind of area. And he was going to lease an R44, and he was going to do rides and tours and make it available for the local law enforcement to do search and rescue. And he crunched the numbers based on what Robinson said it costs to run run the helicopter. And he was convinced that he was going to be able to keep in business. But I looked at the numbers, and it would require him to fly something like 500 hours. And I think it was 500 hours a year in order to make this work. But he's in Wyoming, and there's a very short flying season, and I only fly 200 hours a year, and I'm working it. I don't think that he could make it. And the problem is that people really, instead of doing the numbers objectively and trying to learn from what the numbers are telling you, what they'll do is they'll go into it saying, I'm going to make this work. And then they'll massage the numbers so that the numbers tell them what they want to see. Yeah. And that's just a recipe for disaster, financial disaster. So
absolutely.
Whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. But likewise, great takeaway there. Thank you for that. So you've been doing a lot of things. I love the way you've got your fingers in different pies here. What are you excited about what you're doing now?
Excited about it? I'm, oh boy. I have to say that I'm not nearly as excited about flying as I used to be. And most of the reason for that is that I can't really fly. I can't at this point because of the ugly divorce. I can't really afford to fly for fun as much as I used to. I used to think, well, let's go out to lunch, and I'd hop in a helicopter with a friend or two, and we'd fly to someplace where there was a restaurant nearby, and just do that and do some scenic flights along the way and just have some fun. And now it's the only time I really fly is when someone's paying me to fly. And a lot of times that's limited to flying right after it rains or flying in the dark over almond trees, maybe, or, things like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of, right now, I'm kind of a sad pilot because I'm not doing it as much as I'd like to. However, that said, once I get the overhaul taken care of on my aircraft, which will be about a year and a half from now, it's going to go in for overhaul, and that's a very expensive thing. So I'm really, really saving all my money for that. Once I get out of that overhaul situation and that's paid for and I'm back on my financial track, I should be able to do a lot more flying for fun again. And then I'm also going to start pushing the winery tours more. I also used to do something in Arizona. I used to do multi-day excursions by helicopter. And I would take people for a 6-day trip, and we would travel from point to point by helicopter. And at each destination, there would be tours and hotel and whatnot. And so we'd go to, I don't know how much your listeners know about these places, but Sedona, very scenic area of Arizona, Red Rocks. And then the Grand Canyon, of course, everybody knows. And then Lake Powell, which is a beautiful lake out in the middle of the desert, Monument Valley. And then Flagstaff, which is kind of a neat town. So we hit each of those points and everyone would get to do tours and things. And I'd do it for, a couple at a time, 2 people at a time. And I'd carry their luggage and we would travel by helicopter. And I didn't do too many of these because they're very expensive. It was $6,000 for the couple, which is a lot of people, they just don't have that kind of money. But it was a really great experience. And I really enjoyed doing those too, because it got me out to see these beautiful places that some of them were pretty far and I wouldn't normally fly there by myself because of the cost involved. So I was doing those, and what I want to do here in Washington is I want to work up a couple of multi-day excursions for wine lovers, where we go, and it would probably be a 3-day thing. I pick them up on day 1, take them to a winery has an inn nearby. They do wine tasting, and then we go out to another city that's got multiple wineries, and then spend the night in that town. And then the 3rd day, go to some more wineries and then come back. And I just need to sit down and work up a plan for that and do some marketing. Because that would be a fun thing to do too. Sounds like a lot of fun to me. Yeah. Yeah, it's fun. I'm landing at the wineries. Well, when you arrive anywhere by helicopter, it's a cool thing. Back in Arizona, there was an airport in the Phoenix area that had a restaurant right on the taxiway. There was a little airport ramp out front. And when you landed, everybody in the restaurant would see you land. And I would do, I call them the Moonlight Dinner Tour. And we would take off around sunset and we'd fly halfway around the city, and I'd land them, right after sunset at this restaurant. And my people would go inside, and everybody in the restaurant had seen them get out of a helicopter. So they're instant celebrities.
Yeah. Excellent.
And then they would have their dinner. And then when they were done, we'd get back in the helicopter, we'd take off, and then it was nighttime and the city lights would be all lit up. Phoenix is really pretty at night. And I would take them back to where we started. People like arriving by helicopter. It's a real, it's a statusy thing. I've done a lot of engagement flights, things like that.
The life of the commercial helicopter pilot. I can see you dropping these guys off at this lovely restaurant. The couple go in and have a nice meal. Yeah. Meanwhile, Maria's there with her sandwiches, sitting in the cockpit with a flask of tea.
I would sit in the restaurant bar, and of course I couldn't drink. But I'd sit in the bar, and they'd make me a salad, and I would say to them, "You got to feed me quick because I have to be done before they're done."
Fantastic.
And they take care of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so you've done a lot of things, but take us back. Tell us your proudest moment in your flying career so far. Tell us that story.
My proudest moment? Well, I had a weird, I don't know if I should tell this story. I may as well tell a story. It'll be definitely interesting for people who don't know about it. Most people don't. When I was flying at the Grand Canyon back in 2004, I had a flight where one of my passengers jumped out of the helicopter over the canyon.
Whoa.
And yeah, it was really shocking. As you can imagine, I was pretty, you're flying along and then somebody opens the door and you realize that what he's about to do. And I was actually held him in. I grabbed him by the back of his pants. He was sitting right next to me. And then I realized, this guy could go crazy. He could grab the controls. He could, I have no way to subdue him. And so I let him go and he jumped out. And the proudest moment was the fact that I was able to hold it together mentally, because I was, kind of crazy, to get the remaining passengers back. But the other thing was that when he jumped out, he had not taken off his headset. So when he jumped, his headset was dangling by the cord on the left side of the aircraft. And this door, of course, was still open, but of course the wind, we're still moving at 80 knots, 90 knots, and I had the presence of mind to instruct the rear seat passengers to reach forward and gently reel that thing back in, because if that had gotten loose and hit the tail rotor, we would have crashed. Just having the presence of mind to instruct them to do that while I was still flying, to communicate with the base, to let them know that this was going on. And then once the headset was back in, to reach over and actually close the door, which I still can't believe I was able to do, reach over and do that while I was flying, and then bring it all the way back to base and touch down, the softest landing I think I've ever done in my life. That to me, I'm kind of proud of that. I'm proud that I was able to, to keep it together for that.
Wow, that's definitely a story, and I see why you're quite proud of yourself for that. Awesome.
That's the only thing I can think of. I mean, other than I'm always proud when I can get out and help my cherry drying clients, and when they call me up after a flight and they say, the cherries look good, you saved our crop. They say things like that to me, and that makes me proud too. But that's just part of the job. The other thing was, I think, a little bit. A little bit more than what I bargained for. So,
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's definitely a story. Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, we want Maria to be a happy pilot again. What are your future plans or aspirations?
Well, I am in the process of putting the finishing touches on my home in Washington here. I bought 10 acres overlooking the Columbia River. It's a gorgeous place. So it's beautiful. I decided that I wanted to wanted all of my possessions to be under one roof, which for most people that might not be a big deal. But the fact is that I do have the helicopter, and I have an RV that I was using extensively for my traveling, when I travel with the helicopter for cherry drying and frost. And then I also, during the years that I was making good money, I happened to acquire some other people call them toys, so I have a couple of cars. Nothing's new or great. But it's all paid for, which is nice. And so I have these, I have 3 cars, and I have a little boat, and I have a quad. And so I have these little things, and I want to keep them all under one roof. And so I had a large garage. It's a type of construction called pole buildings. And I'm not sure if anybody over there would know what that is. They basically construct the building by putting in these vertical heavy duty posts, and then they hang the building on it, and then enclose the building, and then put it in a concrete slab at the bottom. Yeah. And the net result is a garage, very, very large garage. It's about 2,800 square feet downstairs, and then there's 1,200 square feet upstairs for me to live in. And then I'm putting the finishing touches on that now, and I'm going to be moving in really soon. Out in front, there's a pad where I've got a platform on wheels, and I land the helicopter on that, and I pull it right into the building. Awesome. And it makes me very happy to have everything together. Yeah. And it's also wonderful to be able to, I don't fly that often. During my busy season, I might go out on 2 or 3 flights a week. I mean, I really don't fly very often. I go in the wintertime, I hardly fly at all. I might go 2 months without flying, for example. Yeah. So being able to keep it here where I can keep an eye on it, keep it clean, and then be able to just push it out onto that with the platform, push it out onto my pad out front, fire it up, fly away, come back 2 hours, 5 hours later, whatever, land it on the platform and reel it back in. That's a really great feeling to have that right at my home. And that's making me a happy pilot, that's for sure.
Wow. I'm definitely smiling thinking about it myself. So that is really great. And I can't wait for you to realize that and everything gets complete. So good luck with that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Maria, this is my favorite part of the show. This is the quick fire checklist. This is where I ask you a series of questions and you come back to us, the inspired pilots, with amazing and inspiring answers. How does that sound? You ready?
I hope I don't let anybody down with this. Okay, I'll try it.
Okay, let's go. Okay, what is the best piece of advice related to flying that you've ever received?
Fly the aircraft. I know that sounds like a weird advice. I can elaborate if you'd like.
Yes, please.
My first check ride, private pilot check ride, was done with the flight school owner, who was a examiner also. And I was a nervous wreck, and I passed. I did fine. I did safe. But he said to me, you seem like you're afraid of the aircraft. You need to fly the aircraft. You need to control the aircraft. In other words, don't be afraid of it. You have control. And that's what I took from that. And it's true. You have to get beyond any fears that you have. You have control. You have the ability to do this. If they let you take your check ride, if they let you solo, they think you could do it, so you can do it. So just do it already and don't, stress over it.
Fly the aircraft. Awesome.
Fly the aircraft.
Okay. Do you have a favorite internet flying resource that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I like to use, for flight planning, I use something called SkyVector, which is a website that has charts on it. And if I'm, say someone calls me and says they want me to do a survey flight, and they give me the location and they want to know what it's going to cost, I could bring this thing up on my screen, and I can make a little flight plan on it, and it knows, what kind of aircraft I've got and all that. And it tells me how, the distances and all that, so I can rapidly give them an idea of what it would cost. And I also use it for long flights. Like, for example, if I'm doing a cross-country flight to California, maybe to bring the helicopter down, I might use it for that, because I can see on a big screen, I can see the whole route at once, and I could reposition to different airports that have fuel and get all the information I need. So that's my favorite flying-related site.
Excellent. Make sure that's linked in your show notes. Can you share one of your personal habits that you find useful and believe contributes to your flying success?
I have to say that I'm not really as good with checklists as I should be, which is bad. You should really use checklists as much as possible. But I do have, I wouldn't say for flying success, but for flying safety, is I always do a walk around of the aircraft one last time before I get in and fire it up. And that's something I picked up at Papillon. It's a habit I got into at Papillon, where you never know, maybe I left one of the ground handling wheels on, or maybe one of the doors is open, or something, one of the latches isn't fully closed, and you just walk around it and look at it one more time before getting in. And that's a good safety habit, I think.
I think safety is success. So I'll take that. And it's funny because I flew today and I did exactly the same thing before I jumped in the aircraft. I knew everything. I've already checked. I've been around numerous times, and I just thought, one last look around. I literally just walked around the whole aircraft and jumped in. So that was good. So I follow you there. Can you recommend one aviation related book?
Oh boy. I used to read a lot of aviation books. You know which one I liked? This is a good book. It's called The Cannibal Queen. It's not about helicopters. It's about a boy's coming of age flying book. And it was written by, oh boy, I can't even remember the guy's name. He's an author. He's known for his fiction. Okay. And he wrote this book about when he was a kid, this flight that he had done. And I recommend that. It's called The Cannibal Queen. I think that's probably one of my favorites. In fact, I should read that again. For helicopters, the book Chicken Hawk, which is written by a Vietnam-era pilot, is a real wake-up call of what it was like to be a Vietnam helicopter pilot back in the day. Pretty scary stuff. And that's interesting if you're into helicopter flying.
Awesome. So 𝗘𝗽𝗶𝗀𝗰𝗀 and Chicken Hawk, I'll make sure they're linked to in your show notes. Okay, what is your favorite non-essential but essential to you technology gadget in your cockpit?
Oh, definitely my iPad. I use ForeFlight. It's my electronic flight bag. It's been approved by the FAA on my Part 135 certificate for electronic flight bag use, which might make it essential, come to think of it. But it takes the place of a chart. It opens and closes my flight plans. It does tells me where I am exactly all the time. If I'm within cell tower range, I get weather information. I could also see radar to see if there's any storms in my path. It shows if I had more gadgets attached to it, I could get traffic on it, but I don't have any of that attached on it right now. So I would say for sure my iPad, and then as a backup device, my iPhone, which has the same capabilities, but my old eyes do not like to read that little tiny screen.
It's difficult, hey?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so iPad and ForeFlight. Okay, this is my favorite question now. So if you had a time machine and could go back in time and meet your younger self just as you're about to start your flying journey, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I would just tell myself to look for the clients that would, make my business succeed. Not waste time on the stuff that isn't going to work, that isn't going to take my business forward, because it all, in the long run, it all comes down to, flying is one thing. And when you work for somebody else and someone's paying you a salary, that's great. But if you are the source of income, when you become the source of income for yourself, and flying is how it's going to happen, you have to make it profitable. So that to me is really important, is just to be able to go and get into that a little bit earlier than I did. Other than that, I mean, just fly more places, get more experience. Although I have to say, I flew a ton. I mean, as a private pilot, I was flying, as a pilot not flying commercially, even though I had a commercial ticket, I was flying, 200 hours a year, which is a lot more than most pilots fly.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Excellent, love that advice. Inspired Pilots, you can find all the links to all the resources and everything else we've been talking about in today's episode by going to inspiredpilot.com and search for Maria in the search bar to find the show notes for this episode. Okay, Maria, listening to your journey, it's been amazing. I've really enjoyed it, and I do have a little soft spot for the R44.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know whether it's something to do with my surname or what, but I definitely want to sort of sow the seed with the other half, and she just looked at me a bit strange. So let's go. Can you give the audience of Inspired Pilots just one last piece of guidance, share how people can get in contact with you, and then we'll sign off?
The one thing I want to say is never give up your dreams. Just don't give up your dreams. If you want to be a pilot because you want to fly, and that's the only reason you should want to be a pilot, is because you want to fly. You want to be a pilot. Don't give up. Don't let things get in your way. You can make it happen, even if you have to do it part-time, even if you have to squeeze it into a busy schedule, squeeze it around family, commitments. You can make it happen. And if you don't make it happen, you'll regret it for your whole life. And who the heck wants that? So make it happen. My blog, it's called The Eclectic Mind. Most people can't spell eclectic, so I tell them also you can get it at marialanger.com. And that's my blog, and you can read about flying and other stuff that I write about and contact me that way. And I'm also on Twitter as 𝑚Langer, so �ＭLANGER, and that's another way to reach me.
Awesome. I'll make sure all those links are on your show note. If listeners want to get in contact, they can do there. Okay, Maria, thank you for joining us on the show, for your time today. You've been very generous. On behalf of the Inspired Pilots, I'd like to say thank you and speak to you again.
All right. Thanks so much. Good luck.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Inspired Pilot podcast. Don't forget to head over to inspiredpilot.com. That's where you'll find the show notes for every episode, links to all the resources mentioned, and much, much more. Wherever you are on your pilot journey, get ready to be inspired.